So my name is Dan. I'm part of Manchester Medical Research Society. This is one of maybe our third lecture in the Research Society AFP scheme. So today we've got Sid. He's a doctor in London, just started, and he's also in the AFP track. In which hospital is it?
It's in King's College Hospital, yeah.
King's College Hospital. So what we're going to do today is essentially just cover the process that Sid had to go through in order to successfully get this position. And then we've asked you guys to submit questions. I had a form earlier. I'll check that at the end as well, just see if there's any more questions that slipped in. But if you guys have any questions throughout, just put them in the chat and we'll acknowledge them towards the end and get your questions answered. This lecture is being recorded and the slides will be given out as well afterwards. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to send out a feedback form. You fill it in, we'll give you the slides and a certificate. And then I think the current plan is if you want the recording, just message us on Facebook and request it and we'll provide it to you. In terms of future events, please just follow us on the Manchester Medical Research Society Facebook page just to keep up with all the events we've got coming up. All right, that's my spiel done. I'm going to pass over to Sid. Take it away.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see that screen now? Yep. Yes, I don't. Or is it still taking time?
Yep, video. I can see these slides. It just takes, like you said, a bit of lag.
I'm just going to make it bigger. Okay, so yeah, I'm just starting off the presentation now. So yeah, as I said, main focus of this talk will just be talking about the academic foundation program, but obviously specific to London and how to basically prepare to get into London and what are the benefits, what's the interview like. I'll focus more on the preparing part and what London process is like. I think the actual specifics of the interview, particularly each station, I think that would be probably better suited to doing nearer the time of the interview. Particularly, I'll go on to say with London, you get plenty of warning before you have an interview, so you have a lot of time to prepare. And I think I'm sure there'll be events on how we kind of how you prepare for an interview, how you prepare for the clinical station and the academic station. So the main focus of this presentation will be talking specifically about the London AFP and why maybe it might be something that you'd be interested in doing. So essentially, why London? Well, for a lot of people, it's a city in the UK, therefore, outside of medicine, it has plenty of opportunities. It's a lot bigger than Manchester, so socially it's great. And I think it just gives people a new challenge, particularly because London tends to attract not just people from Manchester, but also, a lot of students from across the country. So you end up meeting people from pretty much all walks. And I think for me, being in King's College Hospital, I've not met a single person from Manchester in that hospital. I do know people from Manchester and London, but in the hospital, people from Imperial, King's, Swansea, everywhere across the country. So it's quite nice to kind of have a fresh start and see like new people while still knowing people in different hospitals. Specifically for AFP, there's 125 AFPs available. In Manchester, for example, or the Northwest, I believe there's only 30-ish. Don't quote me on that one, but I believe it's in that range. Whereas you can clearly see that in London, there's a lot. Some of those are in Brighton, but not a huge amount. I'd say maybe about 12. And I'll show you a link later, which actually breaks down where each AFP is and which hospitals they're in. And as I said, there's across several hospitals. I'm pretty sure there's maybe like 8 or 9, and a lot of them are the major hospitals as well in London. So I'll go on to say how you go about maybe picking your AFP. But you have plenty of opportunities for a hospital that might be suited to a career that you're interested in. And there's a variety of specialties. So just from my own personal experience, I'm kind of interested in neurology and neurosurgery. And so I picked King's College Hospital as my AFP because it was a big centre for neuro. And there's a lot of people that tend to pick different areas. So if you're interested in kind of hepatology, King's College has also got a big centre for that. And then parts of North London and the Royal London also have like big centres, and there's paediatric hospitals with big paediatric kind of projects and AFPs as well. So it gives you plenty of opportunities to do something and something you're interested in. In addition to that, you can rank pretty much every single AFP from top to bottom. So because I was quite interested in neuro, I only ended up ranking about 14, which, meant that if, say, my interview didn't go well or my application wasn't that strong, it would mean that I probably wouldn't get an AFP. If you have a decent application or even like an average application and you rank them all, you're putting yourself in a really good chance of getting a project, because essentially, I'll go on to talk about it shortly, but if you get to interview, you've pretty much got a two in one chance of getting a project. So it's pretty good odds, and a lot of people who even rank in the bottom half of the 250 that get invited to the interview end up getting a job. So your main focus is just getting an AFP, period. It doesn't really matter what specialty it is in. London's probably the best option for you. In addition to that, so this is very similar to the Northwest application. There is just one major difference, is that in London you get told in about October time, so pretty much 2.5 weeks after you submit your application, you get invited for interview. So sorry, there's a bit of an error here, but essentially the application process this year closes about November, I believe. So this will actually be, this is from last year, it was late October, but it'll actually be a bit later, so this should probably be about mid-November that you'll probably get your interview. And then the interviews in London are divided into 3. So you have one in late November, one in early December, and one in early January. Now, the main caveat here is obviously the fact that because of Corona, I think a lot of things have been delayed. So I would bear in mind that these interview slots might change. They might actually be postponed slightly, because I'm not sure how Corona has affected the application timings essentially. So I would bear that in mind. The other thing is, if we were to go into another lockdown, there is a possibility that these might actually be remote interviews rather than asking you to come to the centre. They might do it over Zoom, which would obviously change the dynamic a bit. But essentially, you have 3 different slots. So unlike the Northwest one, where you only have one day you can turn up on, you actually have plenty of opportunities to go to interview. For us specifically, because finals are in January, the best one probably to go to is the December one or the late November one, because you also have the SJT around December time as well. So you don't want to have too many things too close. I did my SJT on the 6th, I believe, of December, and then I might interview on my 12th. So it meant that I got a week after SJT just to focus on the interview, and then I had a month to focus on the exams for finals. But the other thing is with the interviews as well, if you have the before your SJT, personally for me, I would have found that a bit tricky, because SJT requires you to kind of get into a particular mindset. It's very hard to jump from clinical into that, because the SJT is a very strange exam, as you'll probably all realise in the coming months. And then following that, you end up getting places your first offer. So the first offers usually come on the 13th of January. This year, the one just gone, it fell right in between the 2 progress tests. So obviously, if you got a place, it was really like a good morale boost, because you ended up going into the next exam a bit happier. Nevertheless, a lot of people I know that ended up getting London AFPs didn't get in, unfortunately, on the first round. A lot of them got an offer pretty much next week. Some of them even got an offer. I think one of the people I knew was like mid-OSCE, and they got out their OSCE and had an offer for an AFP. So it comes in real random batches. The dates for London say, oh, it'll be released on this date, it'll be released on this date. They kind of are a bit random. They'll just send you an email whenever they want to say, by the way, an AFP that's come up, would you like it? So it's quite good for, as I said, getting that opportunity to do the AFP that you want to do. And this is probably the key bit that just kind of makes London a bit different from the other deaneries. I think it's only Leeds and Humber that have like their own, that white space question. It's just London, those 2 regions. And it's essentially based on, firstly, your decile cutoff. So this is kind of their long listing score. So they'll use decile cutoff you've got from university. You usually get that at the end of September. And that will just be automatically uploaded onto Oriel. And they use that to have a cutoff, and it changes every year. So I think about 3 years ago, it was as low as the 6th decile. And 2 years ago, it was the 2nd decile. They haven't released the year that I did, they haven't released a score for that one. In 2019, I believe it was 4th decile. So it varies a lot year by year. So you don't know until basically you get told whether you get in or not. So I wouldn't worry about this too much. don't worry that if you're like say in the 4th decile or 5th decile, don't let that detract from applying, because you could still get a place. I would still like apply. So you can't do anything about this now because your deciles have already been decided, particularly during 4th year or going into integrating year and then going to 5th year. This is only really relevant for those, if there's anyone in the chat who are in 3rd year and still have an opportunity to kind of push their decile up. The pre-interview score is technically out of 20. Their scoring is very weird, and it takes a bit of time to get to grips with what they're trying to say. I've left a link in the resources below, which essentially breaks down how they do it. But just to kind of summarize, and it took me a few times to kind of get my head around it, but essentially, first bit's really simple. Publications and presentations are scored out of 10. So you'll get 2 points for a publication and you'll get 1 point for a presentation. This is the highest area. After that, awards are scored from 0 to 5. Now, this is your own discretion. I would put every single thing, every single honours point, if you haven't got any distinctions, every single distinction, any award you've got, even if it's like a very like basic award you may have won at uni or anything, I would just put it in there, because it's up to them whether they give you the points or not. You've got nothing to lose by trying to big your CV up as much as possible. It's in their hands whether they want to give you the point. It gets a bit complicated at this bit, extra degrees. So because some of you might be postgrads and may have done 2 degrees before you've come in, so say if you've done a master's and a BSc, a master's would give you like 4 points, and then say a first and a BSc would give you another 4 points. So you end up getting actually 8 out of 10 points. But because they don't want to give people with master, like double degrees, too much of an advantage, they tend to divide that by 2. So it comes out of 5 in the end. So you end up getting 4 out of 5, and that's why you get the score of 20. So if you just have a BSc, let's say, and you've got a first in it, you get 4 points. You divide that by 2, you actually only get 2 out of 5, and that gets added to the score. So it's a very weird system. And then to make it even more confusing, this is actually only used for your final score, that divide by 2. Actually get an interview, you don't divide it by 2, and then you just need to get over 9 points, and then after you've got an interview, then your score gets halved. So they have a weird system. I don't know why they came up with it, but essentially, to get an interview, you need to collate 9 points out of these. That's what you need to do. So if you have a BSc and a first, you've got 4, and then any awards, that'll give you a couple, and any posters or presentation, that gives you a couple. So if you're 9 points or above, you can pretty much be guaranteed that you're going to get an interview. And I mentioned this in the previous talk that we've obviously had. There's still plenty of time. I still think there is to go and find a presentation. Nowadays, because of Corona, there's a lot of conferences that are purely online. So just try to find something, and if you haven't got those points, and just submit it, and all you need is for the conference to accept it. You don't even have to present it by the time of the deadline. You just need an acceptance email, and then just save that. They won't even ask you for it, but just have a saved copy of it. And then final 2 bits is the clinical station, of course, and the academic station. Now, in this talk, I won't talk too much about too specific about these stations, because it's still quite early to start like practicing these sort of things. I think there's other parts that you should focus on, particularly your publications and presentations. But I'll briefly touch on what they're about and how maybe they differ from other deaneries, and talk about what resources help for London, essentially. So this is the points breakdown thing that they talk about, essentially. So as I mentioned before, you get further degrees, so that gives you 10 points. And then that 10 points is still used in your pre-interview score. And after you get to interview, that 10 points is divided by 2. And then with the publications and prizes and presentations, it gives you a point score of 20. But the pre-interview score is actually 25, and you just have to get 9 out of 25. If anyone's still confused by the end of that, just message me and I'll try to explain it a bit, because I realised I've probably just confused some people even more. After that, that score is then added to your academic panel and your clinical panel, and then they basically multiply everything by 4. And once they multiply everything by 4, they then add your decile on top. your decile actually doesn't matter at all. As you can see, if you really smash these areas, you could be in the 41st, point for your decile, so third decile on 41 points, and you could easily go past someone who's in the top decile. So your decile is just there because I think Health England, or Health Education England, like it's like a requirement that the decile has to be included in any points-based system. But, I think London have kind of clarified that it doesn't really matter how smart you are. It's more important about how you do in the interview and what your actual research skills is, because they're obviously trying to hire a safe doctor, but they also want to have someone who's keen on research. And not all the time that person might not be great in exams, but they have to be at a certain level, but you don't want to put too much emphasis essentially on the decile factor. And then the actual clinical station. So this 30-minute prep actually is for both the clinical station and the academic station. So when you're practicing, it's very important to start timing yourself as early as possible. Don't panic too much if you go over the time at the start. I wouldn't set alarms, I just start a timer and then see how long it takes you. And you'll actually probably realize that near the start, you prepare a lot faster because you probably don't know all the stuff that you have to do. And actually, as you gain more and more knowledge, you'll realize that you're actually pushing the time limit a bit more. And then once you get a bit more efficient, you start coming back into the time limit. So it's quite normal at the start to feel like you've got loads of time, and then you realize actually I don't, and then you're okay again. And the station itself is 10 minutes. It can go, one of my stations felt like it just disappeared, and the other one felt like it went on for ages. So it varies from person to person, and it's always going to be a medical emergency or an acute case. And the key is to be safe. Don't try to be like a big shot and like try to impress them with your crazy knowledge. They're not really bothered about that. They want to just hire a safe doctor essentially. They want to just, the whole purpose of the clinical station is see that you're safe, so that they can allow you to come in and then do the academic side. They also tend to bring in ethics. I haven't included it on the slide, but I'll edit the slides quickly because there was a couple of errors earlier on, and then send them out. I'll add that in as well. But they're essentially ethics part element of it as well. It's usually about consent, confidentiality. So learn all those bits, but we'll touch upon those bits maybe at a later date. It's just that's also an element, be an element of the clinical station. And the main resource, I would say, is the Oxford Handbook. There's an emergency section in the back. It's about 60 pages long. If anything, that's the one thing maybe you could start reading now, because that helps you in finals. There's an acute station within your finals. As it is pretty much pulled from that book as well. It's only one station, but you're pretty much, once you do this interview, you'll waltz that station. That station's so easy because this interview station is so much harder than that OSCE station. And then finally, weirdly, I found PassMed really useful. I used to just kind of go in the acute bits in PassMed or just kind of do questions, and it would help me just kind of build that knowledge, because it can ask you very random things. So in my interview, they asked me, we did all the station. It was a pneumonia station, very straightforward. First had pneumonia, you do an A, B, C, D, E approach. And actually, that's reminded me. So the clinical station, there's this book. It essentially teaches you. I'll have the link in one of the resources, but it's essentially called Academic Foundation Program Secrets, and it gives you a script that you learn for that station, and you just go through that script. You just say it, and you don't let them won't interrupt. You just keep talking. Talk about your A, what you do in A. Talk about in B, everything you do in B. Specific tests. So I had pneumonia, so I was talking about the CURB 65 score. I want to check the urea. I want to check the confusion. And then at the end, you talk about management. And then they'll start asking you questions about maybe, okay, what if this person sign came up on their x-ray with this, what would you think? And things like that. And they asked me random clinical questions asking about essentially, the patient's daughter has looked inside the notes without permission. What do you do? So obviously that's a confidentiality, and you have to pay a protocol to kind of find out why that happened and how you can stop it from happening in the future. So like an incident report. So they try to bring in these ethics aspects into the station, and they'll ask you like a random question. So I got asked, what are the X-ray signs for an osteosarcoma? So if you don't know the answer, just don't lie. But if you know, that kind of helps. So that's where PassMed comes in. You know random facts. The previous year, they started asking about, congenital liver diseases, just being like, do you know any congenital liver diseases? Can you talk us through them? So it can be weird questions, but they're just trying to push you. They're not particularly trying to see how smart you are. They're just trying to see how good you are under pressure and what you'll be like if you don't know the answer to something. So don't panic if you don't know the answer. Just try to be logical with any approach. And with the abstract station, as I said, similarly, there's a 30-minute prep time included within the clinical station prep as well. It's an abstract, it's not very long. And you have the 10-minute station. It's usually a randomized control trial, although it could be any of these other types of studies. But the thing with the randomized control trial is they can ask you a lot of questions on it. And there's so many things to talk about with the randomized control trial when you compare it to these things. So they usually keep it simple. And the key is, particularly at this stage, is to learn the terminology, the basic understanding of statistics. You don't have to be a master of statistics, just know which test is used where. And then usually, depending on how quick you've gone through the abstract in your interview, so maybe mine lasted about 7 or 7.5 minutes. They asked me about 3 personal questions. They asked me basically, why do I want to come to London? Where do I see myself in 10 years' time? You can almost think of if any of you attended the Northwest talk, you can almost think of the academic station as kind of 70% academia and then 30% of the personal station kind of thrown in one. So you don't have lots of questions, but it's good to be prepared on being asked pretty much anything. And there's again a resource at the end which I found really useful for preparing for those personal questions. But this bit doesn't have a huge emphasis. They kind of just want to find out kind of more about you outside of clinical and academia, essentially. And these are some of the basic concepts that's really important just to get to grips with. And there's no harm in starting early because it sometimes does take a little bit of time for it to click. So Pico, if any of you remember from your EBM sessions in first and second year, it actually comes in very handy. I actually went over those EBM slides in preparation for my interview, and to be fair, they're very basic, but it really helps, giving you a good understanding. So go back through to second and first year and just download those presentations from Matt Keane, just watch through them because they're actually not too bad. Learn your biases because they're really useful to have good grips of these, because when you're talking through an abstract, you want to be able to kind of notice where a bias is going to be, and they're quite obvious once you start to get to grips with them. There's like internal validity and external validity and inclusion criteria. Sorry, they should say exclusion criteria. And so learning these things actually make things a lot easier. And then, terminology like power, p-value, risk and odds, these are really important things to kind of go through. And then specifically for London is, you're all obviously on this chat, so clearly people are interested in going to London. So form a group. Try not to make it a huge group. I'd say about 3 to 4 people is probably a nice size. And try to meet maybe at least once every 2 weeks, and close to the interview, like try to meet maybe pretty much every week. I think 3 weeks before. Try to all have the same interview date because it makes things a lot easier. And by the time it came to the interview, I think 2 weeks before I was meeting pretty much every other night because we were just kind of just tightening up. And try not to be competitive in that sense because, at the end of the day, you are competing against each other, but it really doesn't matter. You should really try to help each other because that's pretty much the only way. Without the people that helped me, I genuinely don't think I would have gotten in. So it's really important to just kind of push each other in like a constructive way. But at the end of the day, you're already getting marked. They're only marking you. They don't care about the 15 other people they've seen that day. So try to like help each other through it because it's really helpful. And just start some solo work a bit earlier if you want. Sometimes it's really helpful when you do a bit of work. So when you go into these groups, you find that actually if you're able to teach someone something, it means you've really understood it. So there's nothing wrong with starting a bit of solo work just to kind of get, as I said, terminology and use the range of resources, which essentially I'll point out now. So these top 2 aren't resources as such. They're just the where I got most of my information about the London AFB. This is for 2020, so they usually post about some point in mid-August regarding the 2021 application. So go through that, go through the different projects, really get to grips with the project, try to understand why you want to do it, which ones you want to do. As I said, I only ranked about 11 or 12, I can't remember, like not very many. And some people I know ranked all 125 and some people ranked 30. It's a personal choice at the end of the day. The more you rank, the better chance you have to get in. But I'm very much in the party, like, you don't want to do, I didn't particularly want to do research in something I wasn't interested in, but other people just want to do research, and that's fair enough. So just find out what you want. I've mentioned these books before, but they are really good. So, I mean, I'll mention them again. This one is really good to read over summer now. It doesn't take very long, 200 pages. You can go through that twice. It's such a good book, and it really helps you just understand how to, like, read a paper, essentially. This is a really good, basically, kind of, you find it online, essentially. If you go on Amazon, just type that in, I'll come up. And it's just a PDF that you pay like £1 for or something. It just gives you a really easy understanding of kind of how the AFP works, what they're looking for. It's very basic, but it's really good starting point. This is kind of quite a level for us, but how they structure their questions, they go through like certain mnemonics, which really help with preparing those personal answers. For London, it's really not much of a big deal, but actually going through them, maybe, spending maybe like 20% of your time just focusing on this, it's probably fine. And it doesn't take, you don't have to read all the sections, you just have to read particular chapters. And also preparing for these kind of just helps you with your confidence, particularly in the interview. Because sometimes they might ask these questions right at the start, sometimes they might ask them right at the end. So you can go into the academic station and kind of throw you whichever way they do it. So it's good to be prepared, essentially. And this is the book that I was mentioning. I just found it in my drawer. This is a really good book. It's very specific for London. It's the guy who writes it essentially got into London into like an Imperial AFP, and he breaks it down really well. And pretty much, I think, all but one of the authors is a London AFP. So it's actually really well tailored for those applying to London, and it essentially focuses on kind of having almost a script to go through each station and just adapting it depending on the scenario. And I think sometimes that gives people a bit of sense of ease, knowing that if they just stick to a structure, they don't panic as much. And the examiners are quite good. They won't ask you any questions unless you pause. So if you are saying the right things and talking the right way, they'll actually let you talk. If you start saying something wrong, they will interrupt you. So silence is actually quite a good thing in these interviews. It's a very strange experience. I spoke for maybe 7 minutes straight in both of my stations without being interrupted, and it actually felt fine. It was strange when rehearsing, but they just look at you. They just stare blankly at you and they expect you to like carry on. So don't be disheartened by that. That's just how the interview is. And these YouTube videos, there's again, a London doctor made these YouTube videos, and it just very simply breaks down. It's 5. This is just the first one, but he's made 5 videos. They're not very long, and just goes through kind of very basic and a little bit more about the London AFP and what to go about it. So, this really helped me, actually. I wish I'd watched this over the summer. I ended up watching it maybe in October, and I realized that I was missing so many things, and it really helped me in preparing towards the end of the interview. Because once you kind of learn these things, you then end up kind of things to end up clicking in your head, and you find other resources, just bits and bobs around the internet, and you just add to all that. So it's quite nice having this as kind of a base or a platform to build upon. I know some of you sent in some questions. These are the 5 questions that we received. Because this interview is being recorded, I'll just talk through the questions, and then obviously if anyone's put any questions in the chat or has any questions at the end, I'm more than happy to answer them. So the first question was, any advice on how to prepare for the critical appraisal station during the interview? Well, the main focus is, as I said, learn the terminology first. Those resources that I mentioned, just go through them all. I'd say quite a good thing to do first is probably watch those YouTube videos. I'd say the guy gives you a really good understanding of how to prepare for the interviews, what the interviews are all about, and he's very down to earth. He's very, very like a good doctor to watch. And then after that, I'd say read how to read a paper. Sometimes you have to read it twice. It's really well written, but some of the sentences they can be a bit confusing to get your head around. And then once you've kind of gotten that would recommend going through this book. And then the key thing is to learn kind of a strategy. So my whole thing for the critical appraisal station was to use the PICO, so patient intervention, comparator, and comparator slash, intervention and outcome. And essentially all the biases, the selection bias, what it was, the purpose, the role, everything came from those 4 areas. So if you kind of keep it structured, I really like it because it shows that you've got like a thought process. If you kind of scattergun approach, you're more likely to confuse yourself. So in the prep period, I read the abstract and I wrote for patients and literally looked at the cohort of patients, where have they come from, is it appropriate for the study. An example would be if you're doing a study on heart failure, you're testing a drug on heart failure, but all your patients are young, fit, like men, kind of not really the appropriate age range to go by. But at the same time, if you pick really old, frail people, it's like ethically can be a bit dodgy. So it's really important to learn ethics as well for this aspect. So those are some of the things, and close to the interview date, I think we'll probably hone on those parts more. With regards to work-life balance, obviously it can be very challenging, particularly when it comes up to interview date. But in a weird way, because of coronavirus, I think a lot of the fun stuff that we normally do is kind of limited at the moment anyway. So we have a lot more time to work now than you probably have ever done before. I would definitely not, start going like 100% in like September and October. I take it easy. I just build into it. When it comes to, once you found out you have an interview, then I'd say you start ramping it up, because about 6 weeks. And you'll realize as you come close to the interview, you'll just be stressed anyway. So you'll want to just work, and that's absolutely fine. I think everyone, so many people apply for AFP, that everyone's in the same boat at that point. And this is a really good question, actually, question 3. So I touched on that before. Most people get an interview for London. Essentially, if you rank in those deciles, you're pretty much guaranteed, and you get the 9 points, then you're guaranteed an interview. I think, if I remember correctly, 900 people apply for an interview and about 250 get an interview. Sounds like a lot, but a lot of people will be applying but we don't have a strong enough application. So it's very individual dependent. So it's kind of hard to answer that one, really. You kind of know within yourself whether you're going to get an interview or not. So just have a look at your CV, and if you're like 1 or 2 points shy, just honestly, like, I would scour the web for a presentation to do. And with the presentations, pull up an oral and a poster for the same topic, because you get double points. So if you're just a little bit short, I would just go for it. And even if you are, say, on 8 points, just no harm applying, because each year they kind of change the boundary anyway. So it's hard to know, really. And yeah, I think the 4th one kind of goes hand in hand with the 3rd one, because there's no white space questions. It's much harder to sell yourself. It's much more based on your CV points. So yeah, the key focus is you don't have to worry about all those long answers. You can kind of just go, okay, I need to get a presentation. Let's find something. And just email your supervisor being like, just be honest with them. I need a presentation for like an AFP. I submit this project. I'm sure they'll be absolutely fine. They won't really care. And in the interview process, so it's 2-to-1 ratio essentially. 250 people get invited to interview in 125 places. And if you rank all 125, you're pretty much, if you do half decent at the interview, you're pretty much going to get in. If you rank like 10, you've got to do pretty well to get in. So it just depends on you personally. It depends on how much you want to do AFP, or how much you want to do just one project. If you really just want to do one project, if you're just interested in cardiology, I wouldn't waste your time doing an AFP in another area unless you're fine with doing that. I personally wouldn't have enjoyed doing something, say, in pediatrics as much as I would have wanted to do something in neuro. I would have felt that that time would have been taken away, that I could have had a normal foundation program and then just try to do a side project in neuro, essentially. But yeah, those are the 5 questions. I think that there's might be some in the chat. I can't really see.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in the chat.
Sorry, I feel like I went on for a while, but it's hard with these Zoom meetings. You can't interact with people as easily without seeing their faces.
The first question is at 7:14. If you're able to scroll through the chat.
I will just stop sharing. Give me 1 second.
No worries. Yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot of good tips in there, I think.
I need
especially with
to
regards to
edit.
preparing.
I have to edit the slides slightly because I was sent them by Daniel. It's very similar to the Northwest one. Essentially, I tried to adapt it, but obviously I left a few bits. I will just let me just get up the questions.
Yes, the first question's at 7:14. It's asking, sorry, at 7:21, it's asking if you have multiple degrees, are they all counted if they're at different levels? For example, a BSc, that's a 2-1, and then I think that's the Bachelor's of Dental Surgery, BDS. So they're both counted, are they?
Yeah, they'll both be counted. Yeah, I'm not actually sure how the Bachelor's of Dental Surgery works actually. For example, I had a BSc and a Master's. So I had a 2-1 in my BSc, so I got 3 points for that, and then I had a Master's, which gives you 4 points regardless of what you got in it. So that gave me 7, and that was divided by 2, giving me 3.5. The 7 were still included in the pre-interview score, so all you have to do is to get to 9. So actually, if you've got 2 degrees, you're in a really good position because you only need to make up 2 points from somewhere else. So yeah, I have to double check. We'll definitely answer that question in that program. I've not actually come across anyone who's got a dentistry one, so I would double check. And if not, just send them an email. Just find out because they will respond and let me know. I'd send them the email like soon because they can be a bit slow, but they will respond.
Fair enough. The next question is, you mentioned that obviously you can put in honours and distinctions.
Mm-hmm.
This one is just asking whether if you got them in a progress test which doesn't count towards your EPM or your ranking score, are those fair game to put in?
Yeah. I got a distinction in second year, and I put them in, and I'm pretty sure they got me points.
Yeah. It's like you said, just put everything in, and if they want to take it, they can take it.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't even worry about that. Even if you got a distinction in that from first year, just put it in. They don't care. No one cares. They genuinely just they will give you the point as soon as they see the word distinction.
So do you need to request like your transcript from university or something?
No, nothing like that at all. It's a very strange process. Obviously, don't lie. They don't check. It's really weird. So, tell the truth and basically put all your scores in, but it's up to them whether they give you the point or not. So if you have honestly got a distinction in your PEP project in first year, you've got a distinction in a project, it doesn't really matter. And I would even go as far as saying, if you've got any awards in your undergrad or PSC or your master's year out when you're integrating, put those points in because it's up to them whether they wish to give the point or not. I got a travel award for going to a conference, and they hand travel awards out to a lot of people, but they gave me a point for that. So it's really up to them. So you have 10 spaces to fill. Try to fill all 10 if you can. With honors, anything. So it's up to their discretion as long as you're honest and you put the correct details. It's up to them. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
All right, fair enough. I submitted a question. I just put it in the chat. I was asking the clinical questions that you were discussing that take place in the interview. How would you compare them in terms of their difficulty when you look at questions that you get at the end of like an OSCE station, for example?
That's a good question. So it's very different from an OSCE. So it's weird. It's kind of like an OSCE, but it's a bit longer, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But because you have that prep period, they kind of expect you to come up with like better answers because you've had 30 minutes to prepare. So imagine if someone gave you the OSCE questions. Well, not the questions. Someone gave you the scenario maybe 30 minutes before the OSCE station. You'd have time to think about how you're going to approach the station a lot more. So I would say they probably expect more of you. I wouldn't say the questions were particularly harder. They just expect you to have thought about it a bit more. So, as I said, I had a lady with pneumonia. It was really obvious she had pneumonia. I think pretty sure it said in the question in the little paragraph, this lady has pneumonia, or they showed something. It was really obvious. So she had like sputum, green sputum, cough, fever. It was pneumonia, and the station is very like strange. You go in and you say, you've been asked to see this patient. How would you approach this situation? And it doesn't matter if you know the patient's fit and healthy or the patient's about to die. You would say, I'm going to approach this with an A to E approach. But specifically for London, actually, try not to use abbreviations. So I know I've just said A to E. Use I would approach this as I would approach any acute patient. So start off by assessing the airway, and you talk through what you assess. So you'd say, I'd listen. I'd look for any signs of, anything that could be blocking the airway, any changes and stuff in there. It's all written in here. I can't actually remember it off the top of my head right now, but it's all written in here what sort of signs you'd be looking for, and it's actually written in a script. So I would suggest learning the script and then adapting it how you feel best to say it. And then you would say, if there are no issues with air in the airway, I would move on to assessing the breathing. You go through the breathing, and sometimes they give you like a bit of observation. So I said I would assess the respiratory rate, and they tell you the respiratory rate. Or then you would always go, and then at this point I would request someone, or I would carry out an arterial blood gas, order a portable chest X-ray, and you always mention, because the whole purpose of ABCD is the airway is always the worst. So if something goes wrong with the airway, it takes priority of B. Same with B over C. After you finish each step, you would always say to them, I would then double check the previous step just to make sure there hasn't been any changes in the airway. Only then would I move on to C. You go through the whole thing to C, and then you would say I would double check A and B before I move on to D. It is just learning it like a robot, but then once you learn the script, try to be natural with it. Try to just talk them through as if you were telling your supervisor or something, or in an exam. So it's a bit different from OSCEs in that sense, but yeah, and then they ask you questions related to the scenario. And mine was, the lady's mum came in, she was asking, if you'd look through the notes, she was a doctor, what do you do? And I was like, well, obviously that's breach of confidentiality. And then I was like, eventually it clicked. They wanted me to say clinical incident reporting. So I was like, it's obviously a clinical incident. I would then bring it up with the ward members. And we'd have a meeting and discuss how to stop it from happening in the future, essentially. Like maybe put the notes in a locked cabinet, or not allow family members to enter the doctor's office, something like that. So,
Okay.
then they ask you then they can just be freestyle and ask you, they just went to me, what do you see on X-ray or MMRSSoc, and what sign is it? And I just happened that it was just kind of fluke. I'd seen a past med question that said sunburst sign, so I just said that, and that turned out to be what it was. So that's what the benefit of doing past med is. It can kind of give you those random answers that just kind of come out of nowhere.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, cool. The next question is at 7:26. Any advice for ranking the job, since there's so many to choose from? So, for example, Danish, he's asked the question. He said he wants to do mental health research, but he's also considering psychiatry, GP, education, neuroscience, imaging, etc., because they all just seem interlinked.
So there's a challenge in that as well. I would say obviously put the ones that you want to do first, regardless of how competitive they are, put them first. And then I would probably be a bit tactical with the ones you're less worried about getting. So some specialties have not many AFPs, if you know what I mean. So there'll be 3 cardiology ones. I'm just making that up. That you'd have to go through the list. Some have loads. There'll be a pediatric one in every single hospital. There's a lot of chances to do pediatrics, essentially. So once you put the ones that you definitely are super interested in, and you're just trying to fill the extra spaces, I'd put them in order of what looks competitive. So the fewer people that are interested, options there are, say there's only 2 neuro ones, I would put them a bit higher than the 5 mental health ones or something. But it just depends on what you want to do, and then try to be a bit tactical. There's actually no real right or wrong answer to that, because you essentially have to look at that list at the end of the day and go, if I were to get any of these AFPs, would I be happy? Would I be happy if I got something in, say, Obs and Gynae when I was interested in mental health? So you have to kind of ask that question to yourself. And that's a personal question of whether you'd be willing to do a topic in something that may not be your main interest. Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. Makes sense. Next question is there a time limit on oral/poster presentations you've done? For example, does it have to be in the past 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? What is it?
There's no time limit. I just think it has to be while you're at med school. I can also include your intercalated year, by the way. So if you've done an intercalated year, that's fine. So it just has to be while you're at med school. I believe, yeah. They actually have answered that question in the in one of the 2 links I've sent. I remember reading that question. I'm pretty sure it's while you're at medical school. They might change it to while you're at any degree, but I'm pretty sure it's from first year all the way to application. And it's all about just getting it accepted, remember. So, that you could have a conference coming up in January, but if you know they're going to accept the abstract by, say, mid-October, then you've got a point essentially. So I wouldn't. You've got, so it's just turned August, hasn't it? So you've still got time.
And then the next question is, what is the work-life balance like as an AFP doctor? I mean, obviously you've just started, so
Yeah. Well, having spoken to, well, this is the other reason, which I don't really talk about actually, is why I've done AFP. AFP is kind of 4 months off. I know that sounds bad to say, but essentially you have 4 months where you're not on call. You have 4 months where you don't have to do night shifts. You just have 4 months to kind of work from 9 to 5. Some of it can be from home. And obviously, you're interested in the project, you put your 100% in, but it gives you a little bit more time in that 4 month block to do other things. A lot of people have done AFP. Pretty much everyone I've spoken to talks about how amazing that 4 months is. Having that kind of flexibility to see your friends. And like me, actually, I'll have 4 months of that followed by 4 months of A&E, and A&E is like horrendous. So it's kind of nice to have that bit before it where I can kind of get, a bit more out of my system and kind of see people a bit more social, knowing that A&E is going to like pretty much end that side of my like social life essentially. So it's kind of, it adds, that's an extra benefit of doing it. You're not on any on-call rota or anything. You're off all the rotas. You're just doing your project. And with that as well, a lot of you might pick an F3, which if you're not going into a competitive specialty like surgery or something, then it's 100% the best thing to do. But if you are, say, applying for something like neuro or like general surgery, where it's not frowned upon, but it doesn't look amazing if you waste a year. Or in their eyes waste a year. I don't think it's a waste of a year. I think it's actually a really good opportunity to do something else, travel, go to work in another country. But sometimes, some of the surgical specialties don't see it like that. And if you do have your AFP like at the start or in your second bit of F2, then it gives you that little bit of time to prepare for interviews in the afternoon or the evenings, knowing that you don't have to do an on-call. And if you're working from home, let's say, you can just do a bit of writing, then okay, I can prepare from this till this. I can work from 9 till 3 project, and then I can do the rest of the day working on my interview. So it gives you that little bit of flexibility which you may have lacked had you, do like, say, especially particularly if you end up getting a surgical specialty around about interview time, it can be like hell. You have to wake up at 6 o'clock to get in for 8. So yeah, it's quite nice depending on when you get it. So I would say work-life balance of the actual AFP placement probably is a better than normal placements.
Okay. And then just quick yes or no, I suppose. When you're on that AFP block, can you opt in to do on-calls just to keep your head in the medicine zone, I guess?
I mean, you're not going to forget that much medicine in 4 months, honestly. If I were you, I wouldn't opt in. But it obviously, it's a personal choice. You'd have to find that out, and you probably would have to opt in to do locums in the department that you already worked in. Actually, you'll be an F2, so maybe you can do locum in any department, but I think it has to be within your trust. I'm not quite sure how it works. Certainly as an F1, I'm allowed to locum on my ward. Say if I've got a day off and they need someone, I can come in and work on my own ward and they pay you extra. I really wouldn't, unless you need the money, which is fair enough, I wouldn't waste days off or that time, because particularly if you're going for competitive specialties, or you just want to have a bit of like a social life, I take the time off around it, because once you get into like the highest parts of medicine, like registrar, like meeting some of the registrars, they always complain about not having any time to do anything. So I would make the most of final year, particularly after finals, and make the most of F1 and F2. Like F1 actually isn't that bad at all. It's actually, I have like my first set of nights on until January the 6th, and I only do 3 and that's it. And I don't have another set for like 3 months. So it's actually not that bad, F1. F2 is a bit harder, but F1's really chill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question is, this is from the form that I just found before the lecture. What are the chances of getting an AFP in London if you don't have a publication, but you have been involved in a number of research projects at university?
Okay, so that's a tricky one, because obviously it's really good that you've been involved in research projects. If you have been involved in all those, try to make them into a point. You might not have time to make it into a publication, but try to make it into a presentation. I would just, put something together and just send it to a presentation. Getting a presentation isn't as hard as people might think. Some of you might have some already, but just try to, find a conference that is relevant to your topic, particularly if it's like a really topic like something in medicine, there's going to be conferences everywhere. So just submit it and try to be tactical and look for one that's on Zoom. So then you can just kind of work, just dress up nice, do a presentation from your desk. So yeah, and the other thing is with, obviously, if you have done research and you get an interview, you can talk about it if they ask you it as a personal question. So unfortunately, the London AFP, compared to say the other ones, probably doesn't give you as much opportunity to kind of express, how much work you've done outside of what on the CV. But try to turn it into a point if you can. But if you can't, and obviously if you get an interview anyway, then talk about it. Certainly when you get a personal question, try to always direct the question into how you want to answer it. So if they'll ask you very open-ended questions, so shape it how you want. So rehearse a few answers, try to basically sell yourself, but they'll give you a question that allows you to kind of focus on your strengths. At the same time, they're not looking for like a massive, like someone who's like massively into research. It's weirdly they want an all-round person. I think particularly Kings were telling me a lot of the staff they're trying to look for people that kind of much more all-rounded, because they're trying to move away from that kind of mentality of people that work stupidly hard. They just want kind of the other aspect of it, essentially. They want an all-rounded individual.
Cool, thank you. The next question, we've got a few more left, is do you just need one presentation or do multiple get another point?
How do you mean? So as in yeah, so it's marked out 10. So say if you had 10 presentations, you get 10 points. And so what I was talking about earlier, like doubling up, so you could have the same topic but have it as an oral presentation in one conference and a poster presentation in another, and you get 2 points. You can't have the same oral presentation and present it at 10 different conferences. You have to obviously have a different topic, but essentially you can only double up if you do the same topic in 2 different formats. But obviously you can only get 2 points max out of that. So yes, you can get multiple points. The more presentations, the better, yeah.
Okay, so you could have 10 different presentations, no need for publications, you get the 10 points.
Yeah, but I mean,
okay.
I'd be very surprised if anyone had 10 different like oral presentations. That would be pretty like fair play. But even if you had like 1 or 2, that's the point. That's points essentially. And place that is so obviously your tests are your degree and your presentations and publications. They're kind of, you can't really do much about it. You're one that you can kind of, if you can write well and you can kind of convince them that something is an award, when it if it is an award, it's an award. Obviously don't make up an award, but if you can make an honest point sound to kids, and then you're gonna get a point. Essentially it's a free textbook, you can write it however you want. So if you make an honest point sound like it's amazing, I don't know how you would other than putting honest point, but it's up to them whether they give you the point, essentially.
Sure. Okay, so there's no room for modesty, basically.
Yeah, don't be modest. Like, I remember I got a travel award and I just said, got an award for going to this conference, which I did. I got an award for going to a conference. I just dropped the travel. You don't have to put travel award. I just thought if I put travel award, they'll know what a travel award is. But travel award is still an award. It's in the name. It's just I would honestly wouldn't worry too much. In fact, I might. I'll have a look. I'll see if I can find my application. I think it's in a PDF. I'll send it. I don't mind people looking.
That'd be really useful as like an attachment, I guess, with the slides.
Yeah, I'll have a look. I don't know if I can, but I'll have a browse. You can have a look at what I did on my thing. But I was fortunate enough to have a few distinctions, and then I had that travel award. I might have actually just put travel award, and then I just put the honours points. So I don't know. The likelihood is obviously they probably gave me the points of the distinction because they maxed out of 5. But yeah, I would just go for it. And obviously, if you're one of those students who ranked really well in the OSCEs, and say you got a distinction in OSCE, and you also finished in the top 4 people, mention them as 2 separate points, because you technically got a distinction and also finished off an OSCE. It's 2 different things.
With regards to, this is another question, sorry, do oral presentations and poster presentations get the same number of points? I think you had this on your slide. It was 2 points for. Oh, they do. Okay.
So sorry, an oral and a poster are both presentations, so they just get you a point each.
Okay. Is it a publication gives you 2 points, and then
publication gives you 2 points?
Right. Yeah. I see. Okay.
Going to a conference and presenting anything gives you a point, poster or oral. Getting a publication gives you 2. Yeah. Okay. Publications are more valuable. Yeah.
And then just the two last questions. They're both from me. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
The prep time you
I have
get
to
at the
ask questions
start.
as well.
The prep time you get at the start, does that allow you to make notes and then take those notes into the station as well?
So they changed that last year. So yes, for many years you were allowed to take the notes in, but last year they scrapped that. They told us you're not allowed to take the notes in, and they told us on the day. Oh, they told us so I didn't actually know. The people who had their interview on the 30th of November, we got told on the day you're not allowed to take the notes in, and we only found out like when I was practicing. Someone knew someone who had an interview, and they were like, "You're not allowed to take notes in." So it sounds very daunting, but actually, once you learn what you're talking about, and once you kind of learn, what you have that structure like almost hammered into your brain, it's actually better not having a piece of paper. You talk to the examiner, you're much more natural. So at the start, yes, you always have that urge to look at your piece of paper to remind yourself. You'll have the abstract and you'll have the clinical scenario in the station with you. So they'll have a copy on the table, and you can always refer to that just to kind of jog your memory. You can remember at that point. You won't have that piece of paper because the whole point was, I think they complained the year before that everyone just looked at the piece of paper and wasn't talking to them. And I was like, when I first heard of that, that sounds horrendous. But actually, 2 weeks before the interview, I realized as soon as I got rid of my notes pad and just spoke to them, I felt so much more like, almost felt like I had to just remember what I remembered. You kind of just talk naturally, and yeah, you forget things and you sometimes remember things. It felt so much more comfortable just to have a conversation with someone. You're kind of just talking to them rather than reading, okay, so I'm going to do this. They actually got rid of some of the robotic kind of behavior you might develop when you go through the structures a bit, when you're just kind of having a natural conversation. So it was actually better than you think. At the start, you'll find it hard, but as you get through it, it becomes a lot easier.
Okay, and then the last question, if nobody else has any more questions, is how do you find out about things like the clinical incident report that you mentioned? So, I've been on the wards for 2 years now. I know obviously that the mother shouldn't be able to look at the notes, but I've never heard of this, like the formal incident report.
That was from SJT, I think I learned that phrase. So SJT questions, there was a question about clinical incident reporting. I just remember that in the question, it was like something like consent or confidentiality happened. And it was like, in the SJT question, you want to rank it like, unless it's a major incident, you usually don't want to rank it as the first thing. And so I just remember thinking of it in the question, and I remember an SJT question being about someone breaking confidentiality, and I just was like, in the moment, I just remember that was a thing. So it's a bit of luck. That station actually went really well for me, but I remember they were asking me, obviously it's a breach of confidentiality, like what would you do? And they kept saying to me, what would you do? And I'd be like, obviously talk to the doctors, try to find out. And I was basically explaining to them what an clinical incident report was without saying the phrase.
I see.
And eventually they kept looking at me, and I just said clinical incident report. I just said it, and I didn't even know at the time it was the right answer, but it was. I just kind of like froze and just said something. It happened to be the right answer. It was very lucky, actually. So I wouldn't say panic too much. At the end of the day, in the station, you just know what you know, and you kind of don't know what you don't know. So I think I would just revise, learn as much as you can, but don't freak out if you hear a phrase that 2 weeks before the interview that you never heard before, because you now know that bit. So just I would take your time, because the year before they asked about I think they're called like Kearns-Najjar syndrome. It's like a
Congenital, hyperbilirubinemia, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's an unconjugated. No, sorry, it might even be. No, it's unconjugated. Yeah, it's a deficiency of the enzyme that actually conjugates bilirubin. I only learned that because I heard that it came up in the interview. So you hear these things. So that's why I would say just do pass med. You do that for your finals anyway, but I would get into the habit of doing questions at every given moment, just because who knows, from that 5,000 patch they could ask something. This probably will be from that 5,000 questions they'll ask something, and you'll just remember it because you did that question.
Okay, fair enough. No more questions. If anybody's got any more, just quickly type them up. But otherwise, thank you very much. Really mean it. Just really good tips in there, I think, about applying to London in particular. So for everyone in the chat, we'll have your emails just from you attending this. So we'll send out a feedback form. And then once you fill that out, we'll send the slides and also a certificate of attendance to you. With regards to the recording, I think we might send it in an email, but I think maybe if you just want to go over it, just email us. Just Facebook us, message us on Facebook, and we'll email you the link. Okay. Like I said, any more questions, quickly just put them in. But otherwise, I think that's it.
Yeah, I appreciate. Obviously, it's a lot to take in, and obviously at the start, I remember being like quite like anxious and being like, "Wow, there's a lot to learn." But honestly, by you'll come to December, and if you've prepared like decent enough, you'll be okay. As I said, between now and December or whenever you have an interview, I would try to avoid the January interview as best as you can. Like December one I felt was the best option of the three because it gave you that nice bit of a buffer as a week after the SJT, so you had like a whole week, and then it was 4 or 5 weeks before the finals. And actually, I think your guys' finals are even later this year. I think they won't be till like February or something. I can't remember, maybe in March. So you've even got even more time now. I don't know when if they'll change the interviews for AFP or not, but yeah, try to keep them as far apart as you can because it's actually quite nice. And AFP preparation helps you prepare for a lot of finals anyway. You'll be going through like respiratory emergencies and you end up learning things. So I would just, particularly in the month of November, focus mostly on AFP and try to kind of like drop finals a little bit and then come back to finals later. Is that okay?
I think so. I'm just going to stop the recording then.
No, that's
Yeah,
fine.
thank you very much.
No worries. Well, yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to message me, or like ask and will like send me a message or something. So yeah, no worries.